How we do this, we are the truest. Got these fangs super sharp, your shit toothless. Cold-hearted, yeah we ruthless. All the ghouls in the cut, let's get ghoulish. In the graveyard, acting foolish. Finna dance with the devil to no music. Cold-hearted, yeah we ruthless. All the ghouls in the cut, let's get ghoulish.
Oh shit, oh hi, oh hello, and welcome to a brand new episode of a podcast I like to call Ghoulish. I am Max Booth, an undead host, and this is a podcast where I speak to friends, strangers, enemies, and we celebrate all things spooky. On today's episode, I am talking to someone who happens to be a friend and also happens to be an enemy, a frenemy. That person's name is Zach Chapman, and we are talking about the history of horror comics, spooky comic books, the past, the present, and the future. Well, maybe not the future, but mostly the past. This is a history episode because Zach is a famous comic book historian. He doesn't want me to tell you that, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm going to falsely represent him, because that's what I do on this podcast. I lie a lot about most things. I am talking about the history of horror comics with Zach today because he has a comic book he made coming out called House of Blood. Now, House of Blood is a retro horror comic for the modern age. It's an anthology comic series in the same vein as the old EC horror comics like Tales from the Crypt. So if you're a fan of those types of comics, I think you would love House of Blood Volume 1, which he has just launched a Kickstarter for. When we recorded this episode, we were about a week away from his Kickstarter going live. Now this podcast is coming out maybe 3 days after the Kickstarter launched, and I mean, it's pretty amazing. The goal he was looking for on Kickstarter was only $2,500, and he hit that within like 9 hours of going live. As of the recording of this episode, he is at $3,560, and the pledges just keep on coming in. I'm super proud of him, and I'm so excited that this comic book is happening because it's really fucking good, and I think people are going to love it. So Zach was kind enough to give me an early glimpse into House of Blood, and I read it and I loved it, and this is what I said about it. I gave it some advanced praise. I said, House of Blood is a true horror sicko's delight. Every panel is a celebration of horror at its most fun. Gnarly creatures, wacky science fiction nightmares, and the kind of characters who make you howl with laughter when they meet their gruesome demise. I dare you to read these comics without a big, slobbering grin across your face. And that challenge remains, folks. I triple dog dare you to read these comics without a big, slobbering grin across your face, because I don't think it's possible. I think anyone who picks this comic up is going to love it, and I highly encourage you to head over to the Kickstarter for House of Blood Volume 1 and pledge. $25 gets you the trade paperback of the first volume. That's full issues of a comic book. Volume 1, $25, the whole trade paperback issues. He has other awesome rebuilds like X-ray specs and original signed prints from the eldest. I think the book is great. I think this episode of Ghoulish is a lot of fun. Zach knows his shit about the history of comics. Even if he's not a historian, he might as well be, because, I mean, it's a really fun, exciting episode. We get into a lot of fun topics. I'm just going to get right into the conversation, and I hope you go and support House of Blood on Kickstarter. I will have a link to the Kickstarter in the show notes, so just click it, and go pledge and just lean back in the satisfaction of helping support indie comics at its finest. Let's go ahead and do this. How's I've never listened to Geek's Guide. How do they begin?
Oh God, it's like hello and welcome to Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm David Barr Kirtley, your host, and then he introduces like three panelists.
And
he
then
says
what?
he says like all of my my biography,
Yeah.
which is like he calls me a writer,
Yeah.
and I haven't approached him about that because I don't like to be called a writer because I'm
I got it.
got that. Got that. You can leave that. Speaking of that kind of thing, writers for comic books in the early days were not credited.
Do you think
neither
this is
were
the
artists.
Do you think this is the episode? It's not.
You need to get on that sooner before I start repeating myself.
This is all going in. Hello, my name is Max Booth. You are listening to Ghoulish. I am your host, and joining me today is Zach Chapman, a writer of science fiction and speculative fiction. He edited I'm going to list everything you've done that I know about. He's edited an anthology called Time Travel Tales.
Yep.
That's all I
That's
know.
it. I have a couple of pro sales, and that's it.
Don't you published a few times in those big held cover anthologies you always see at half price books?
Yes, actually I have two stories in those. One's in I think it's called like Gothic Ghost Stories or Haunted Ghost Stories.
Yeah.
And then the other one's Heroic Fiction. And actually you've read one of those stories, or
have I?
Yeah. Well, you've listened to me and watched as I showed an adaptation of Ghost Farm, which is probably like the second or third pro sale that I made. And it's in the Flame Tree Press. They're really beautiful books. They're big. It's like half like old public domain book, short stories, and then half newer short stories. They started doing that probably like 2015, 2016, 2017.
I'm suspicious of that press, because if you go into like any half price books, they have dozens of all of these anthologies, and only half price books, not Barnes and Noble, just these used bookshops. And what I believe is happening is Flame Tree is just buying a bunch of copies of the own anthology and then selling them to every half price books, thinking they will put them in stock, and they do because they look nice.
I mean, I think that you're not wrong. The other thing that's very annoying to me is I'm supposed to get those at cost, and they're cheaper for me if I buy them at half price than what the publisher will sell them to me for.
It's pretty bad. Do you just go around buying them saying, I'm in this? I wrote something in this?
One time I was like, hey, can I sign this?
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, no.
Is that true?
Half price was like, no. we will return that to the publisher if it doesn't sell. Hey, here's what it is. Actually, it's just me selling all of those Flame Tree Press books to half price, like all across America.
Yeah.
I've seen that book at Barnes and Noble. I have seen it. I think just one time.
Did you try to sign it at Barnes and Noble?
No.
My most embarrassing bookshop discovery is once I went to a Barnes and Noble, to one that I had a big signing at, and I found like the discounted book table that's like $2 for each book. And it was all of my books I had signed. Not one has sold.
Wow, ouch. Like the first pro sale that I made, I went to like all the Barnes and Nobles around, and I signed the books that they had there, which was Writers of the Future, and they just like they shit those out, and I don't know how they do it, how they get the deals with Barnes and Noble, but they get them in there.
Anyway, this is all mute now, right? That's what the kids say. They say it's all mute now. Moot. I don't know.
There is no Barnes and Nobles anymore. They've all gone bankrupt.
That, and also you don't write now. You've retired from writing.
Actually, can you cut that whole bit? Because
no,
it's kind of a thing that I don't want to be associated with, like writers and the things like that. Like, oh, I'm an author. Like,
only if I'm allowed to keep you asking me to cut it. Yeah, we can just begin again if you don't want to talk about writing.
I like it's fine. This doesn't.
No one's gonna listen to this. What is this?
No one's gonna listen to this.
I'm getting some
only other writers are gonna listen to this, and that's part of the problem. I don't want other writers hearing me talk and know that I'm a writer and then approach me like I'm a writer.
So if anyone's listening, if you write books, don't.
Fuck you.
Stop listening. Stop it. Shut this off. We're not talking about writing today. We're not talking about books without cartoons in them. We're talking about comic books. Now, I have a few questions about comic books. I mean, I have a lot of questions that I'll probably come up with as we talk. But I mean, I was walking my dog today, trying to think of what I'm going to ask you. And the one thing that keeps coming to mind is, how do you listen to a comic book audiobook? Is that a thing?
It is a thing.
How?
I've never done that. But I do know it's a thing because it keeps happening. Like Audible keeps releasing these books like Sandman that are audio productions. So I don't know if there's extra descriptions of the panels or not, but and it's also by that's by Neil Gaiman, and he's pretty, he's verbose as far as comic books. I mean, he was in that time, he was becoming popular when Alan Moore was popular, and they like to put a lot of text on the page. So it's like you might not it's really fucked up to say, but you might not need like the visuals as much for those pieces. Like it's probably pretty controversial for me to say, but like some Alan Moore, like at least growing up now, I have more appreciation now for Dave Gibbons' contribution to The Watchmen. But when I was in high school, I was just like, fuck this art. Like, it's the story and it's the format and it's so purposeful. And in fact, back then I was like, I wish someone else drew this. I mean, now I have a much, I hold Dave Gibbons in a much higher esteem than I did. But back then, like, it was just all about the writer.
Yeah. I've read a few Alan Mills scripts and they feel insane. It's just pages and pages of text.
Yeah, he the illustrator of Swamp Thing, which is a horror comic, and a horror comic that Alan Moore revived in the 80s. He said that he's the most visual writer that he's ever worked with. Steve Bissett said that. So and I, he said he would get like thumbnails, and this was like when they would like fax and mail this shit to each other. And so these scripts were allegedly, these 20 to 22 pages is what an issue is. They'd be like, he'd send them like novels. But all of the artists love that because, well, I mean, in my experience, I'm not sure if that's true, but I think, people like working with Alan Moore because he explains exactly in great detail what he wants illustrated.
Do you think he would get pissed if he got something that wasn't exactly what he wrote?
It can be pretty upsetting if an artist reinterprets what you've written on script, which is like, certainly happened to me. I've worked, and we'll get to it later, but I've worked with like, over a dozen artists on various projects, you can get art back where genders are changed. I've had that. Ethnicities can get changed. Whole endings can get changed, and a lot of times it's like I love that. Writing comics is a collaborative effort, and a script is very much an internal document. It's not meant for anyone but, it's basically meant for two people. It's meant for the artist and the writer, and every once in a while, the editor.
How do the endings get changed? Like the elitist just goes, nah, I'll do this instead.
I actually recently had an artist on an anthology that I'm not editing. Somebody else is editing, and I'm I think the only writer that's contributing to it.
What did you just say?
I'm the only creator that creates scripts.
Cut that.
That doesn't draw. I'm the only person who's not a draw pencil or inker.
Gotcha.
On that project. I contribute other ways.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, this artist actually rewrote two captions of mine. Rewrote two captions of mine, and I actually at first, he prefaced it in the chat. He's like, I did a little bit of changes, and I was actually very happy with it. I was like, all right, you're, again, the script, and every time I talk to an artist, I'm like, I want to give freedom and leeway to inspire an artist to change things. And if they say this ending is not working for me, then it's a conversation, and usually a positive one. So
how did you begin being involved in not writing but creating comics? How did you get into this? I have no idea, which is why I'm asking you.
Well, a long time ago, when I was I was either in college or I had just graduated, I put together a pitch.
Don't brag.
Oh, yeah. When
Yikes.
I was in school.
Look at this guy. He went to college.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So I had put together a pitch because I was reading a lot of Walking Dead at the time. Saga wasn't out yet, but I was reading a lot of stuff. I was reading Brian K. Vaughan at the time, maybe Why the Last Man. And I was just like, this is the art form for me, or at least this was before any pro sales that I had made. I really just wanted to make comics, and I can't draw. I can design and I can letter poorly on both of those fronts. So I put together a 7-page pitch is usually what you do, and you have to have a collaborator. You can't just send a publisher. That in comic book industry, it's very different from prose or submitting queries for novels. You have to have a full team. You can't just you could maybe get away with just a pencil and an illustrator who doesn't ink. And how
did you discover all of this? How did you learn this is what I need to get together? Because with writing, you read interviews with other writers, craft interviews, this is what you do. Is that what you also did, but with comics?
Yeah, there's very few resources for comics. I mean, there's not even a whole lot of there's arguably not a whole lot of resources for that kind of thing for, prose and, fiction writers, at least when I was trying to sell that kind of stuff, in 2010, I didn't know the fucking first thing about where do I submit this story that I wrote? That's when you're dipping your toe. It's basically doing a lot of Google searching, looking at blogs, looking at, now I would assume that all of that, I have a network now, and I can explain how I did that. But I have a network now where I know a lot of artists, and a lot of colorists and inkers and even some letterers too, but I do all my own lettering. But back then it was just like some message boards, and that's how I found like the first artist that I worked with, a woman named Bo Wright. I lost contact with her. I don't know whatever happened to her, but we worked on a pitch together. And she was
rest
great.
In peace, Bo.
Rest in peace, Bo. But yeah, and I got like some positive feedback on some of the with some of the publishers, but no no bites. So that basically fell through, and then eventually I just what really kicked it off was a project that I'm basically eternally wrapping up called Spellslinger. Every year I say it'll be out this time next year. Been saying that for 4 fucking years.
Well, you know what though? Fuck Spellslinger. You know why? We'll talk about House of Blood today.
Yeah, we are. But yeah, I did that whole thing got funded, and so I learned how to script and did 130 page graphic novel basically, and then from there House of Blood and other projects that I've been working on, or tangentially.
Well, I don't know,
well, yeah, I mean, I send you stuff. There's stuff that I can't talk about, but House of Blood is something that I was approached by 2 publishers to publish it, and I ended up saying no because this was something that I really wanted to just do myself, because it felt like, I don't know, you know about being a publisher, right?
Yeah.
Like sometimes there's some things where it's like, this is for another press, or this is something that's like, this is personal, or this feels indie, or this feels like raw, and it should be something that I have full control over.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where House of Blood was for me.
We're going to get into House of Blood in just a second, but breaking news, my brother just texted me. This is what he just texted me. So, Biden administration is funding free crack pipes. Have you seen this yet on the news?
I have. I've not. Have you, Max? No. Have you seen any crack pipes on the news?
I have not. Is what I'm replying with. So, for those listening, we were on the ground floor of this this fucking outbreak of news.
Can you put that in the comments section if you have any links or any we need to get down to the bottom of that, I'm sure that there's we want that we want to investigate that.
What a fucking lunatic. Okay, House of Blood, for those who do not know, what can you tell us about it?
Well, it's a modern take on anthology horror comic books. And, if you want, I can first get into like the history of comics. I'm not a comic book historian, but
we will. I want to Phil talk about a little bit of House of Blood.
Okay.
Then go back.
Okay. And then we do some rewinds. All right.
Yeah. All right.
So House of Blood is like, it's a lot of short horror stories. They're typically like 8. I think that the shortest one is 7 pages. The longest one's 14 pages. The longest one I actually wrote with our mutual friend, Miguel Villa.
I apologize. You did what with Miguel?
Oh, I collaboratively created a comic book.
Excellent.
Yeah. And so there, let me pull up the, this script or whatever, this House of Blood. So it's 4 issues. It's over 120 pages of sequential art. I've worked with, like I said, over a dozen artists and colorists. And there's some recurring characters. What I was really inspired by was actually not EC. It was this guy named Junji Ito. And what I love about his anthologies is that he's a manga artist and writer. And he will Yes, Uzumaki, and you still probably haven't read that fucking thing.
I haven't even opened it. For folks listening, I am holding some book in my hand.
Uzumaki.
That's how you say it?
Yeah, it means spiral.
The book of Spiral.
Yeah.
Holding that in my hand. You gave it to me a long time ago. Have not opened it yet. Proceed.
You bastard. So I love that book. A long time ago, I read it for a podcast called Books and Beer that I did with our mutual friends Miguel and Andrew Hilbert. And I fell in love with that. And I've read all of his official translations that are in print. And what he does with his stories is he'll have these like these kind of continuing short stories. So like, you don't know, maybe there'll be like 2 stories that take place in the same universe, but then in the next 5 stories are all standalone, and then there'll be like a double, another double story or a sequel to the first story at the the end of the anthology. I fucking love that. Harlan Ellison did that in Dangerous Visions. He wrote a sequel story to one of the stories in that book. But yeah, so I find like sequel stories are super cool in anthologies, and so I kind of wanted to have that with some recurring characters. So yeah, there's it's just a kind of like a total mixed bag of you never know what you're gonna get. There's like dark fantasy that's like Arthurian horror, and then there's like far future horror with like some space cults, and then there's like crime.
What would you say is like the common theme running through them all, or the common like thing that ties them together that makes them a house of blood story?
Like some of the stories have like a slight literary bent, and then some of them are just completely pulp. So it's like there's not really like a theme as much as there is like a lot of variety, and they all take place in the same universe or milieu, so they reference other stories, and so sometimes it's like sometimes it's just a romp, and then sometimes it gets like really dark. The problem that I have with a lot of EC, and we can get to that, but like they're very formulaic. Like you will know the end of the story about like halfway through the first page, like the third or fourth panel, you'll know exactly how it ends. So that's what was important to me, is sometimes like keeping that formula and then sometimes breaking that formula. So to keep as a reader, I always like to be on my toes. So that's why I like a lot of the EC ripoffs, is they might not technically be better, but they're less predictable because they're less, they're written by like random ass people that had weird ideas. And so
what will some of the spin-offs? I don't know anything actually. You tell me.
I mean, there are probably hundreds. So one of the spin-offs that's kind of famous is Black Cat. There's like there's also Black Magic that was done by that's not one that I particularly like. That was done by Jack Kirby. But he like really toned down the violence. Like it reads like a code book. Like you wouldn't think that it's like a pre-code book because there's like not any violence. But that was a popular one. There's like Witches' Tales. There's like one's called, I have it right here. I really like this one, Dark Mysteries. They're just random. Like if you go to Half Price Books and you go to the comic book section, they may have a section called Pre-Code Classics. And if you just pick up a random one and read through it, like you might find like a gold one. Some of them are definitely much more pastiche and not as good as others. It's kind of a mixed bag, but they tend to be expensive, like these hardcover ones. I'm holding up a hardcover. They're called the publisher's PSA art books. They also do this publisher does soft covers of Black Cat, and Harvey did Harvey Comic Books, they did a bunch. So they did a slew of EC ripoffs, and those are all good.
So was EC like the OG when it comes to spooky comics? Or was anyone before them?
So you want me to get into like the history of comics?
Yeah. Who invented the comic book?
Okay, so who invented the comic book is a guy named Max Gaines. He's actually the father of Bill Gaines, who created EC Comics. Well, Max Gaines, I guess, also created EC Comics. But so what a comic book is was created in the mid 30s, and basically Max Gaines was like, let's just cut up a bunch of newspaper like cartoons, and they back then in the newspaper they'd be serialized, right, and they would continue week after week. And so he's like, let's put these in a magazine, and that was in like the mid 30s, and that was like the birth of the comic book. There wasn't really, arguably there wasn't really he is the guy's Bill Gaines' father, who's Max Gaines, basically invented it, right, like that. And then Bill went on to, he's like the major guy behind EC Horror, Vault of Horror, and like the slew of ripoffs that were ripping off him and his like vision. But before that there was like, I don't know, it's like, it's all arguable. Like the Addams Family, I mean, is it a comic book? It's a comic strip. That was probably before. That's probably like mid 30s.
Yeah. When will comic strips like invented then?
Comic book strip, I mean, that's
way older, right?
It's a gray area, right? So comic strips would have been like in the 1800s. I mean, arguably late 1800s, and they would have been mostly political, but then very quickly they would become a little bit more serialized by the teens. And what's crazy is like, I mean, I have to include this because we'll be talking about this later, but in the teens, like these churches like were freaking the fuck out, like because on Sunday there are these papers that had like these color printed cartoons in them, and they're like, what the fuck is this? And there was a complete moral panic over 100 years ago over the fucking funny papers. So they were like losing their minds. And, you know, now you wouldn't blink an eye. In the 60s, in the fucking 50s, like you wouldn't blink an eye at like the shit that's like being printed in the newspaper. You wouldn't, like, there wouldn't be a moral panic over it.
Do you know like what specifically was being printed then? Like what type of stories?
There's something called the Yellow Kid, I believe what it's called. Yeah, the Yellow Kid was a really popular one. That was, first appearance 1895. That was really popular.
What is the Yellow Kid? Because I'm imagining something really problematic.
I mean, he's just like this little kid that's like bald, walking around in a big yellow nightshirt, and I guess would be like get into like scraps around.
Kids stabbing homeless people.
He's a little
Jack the Ripple kid,
Rugrat or something. I don't know. He's probably like 12. I haven't read any of that. I think Nemo is also very old. The one that's like Dreaming Nemo or something like that.
I have no idea what that means. That's fine though. I just was curious. Like,
Nemo.
These people will losing their minds about what type of stories.
Yeah. So there was and a lot of it was political. A lot of it was like racist. A lot of it was like just racist stuff. So I mean, you know, everything was back then.
I mean, I've read House of Blood, so I mean, it hasn't changed.
Yeah, nothing has changed.
No, I don't think there was that much racist stuff in House of Blood.
We'll try to fix that by the time it gets out.
Speaking of politics, an update from my brother. He says taxpayers will now going to be funding free crack pipes to junkies. Cool is what I'll say. Okay, I'll update the podcast if I get anything else throughout. Breaking news, man. This is exciting. This must be what it's like for like someone like watching a tornado come down with a news camera. Like, oh, I'm on the ground floor of death. You know, pretty exciting. Okay.
Your brother, we need to do something about your brother.
There's nothing you can do, man.
Block his ass.
I used to for a long time, but then I unblocked him. I don't know why.
Now you need the updates. The updates are you can ignore the updates.
The podcast cannot survive without these updates.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So by the 40s, right?
Yeah.
Comic books were selling like in the millions, right? So for like comparison, in the last decade, a comic book, there's been like one comic book that sold in the millions, and I think it barely cracked 1 million, and that was fucking Star Wars, published by Marvel, like the biggest thing, written by Jason Aaron, right? So that one cracks 1 million. But back then, you know, like less than 10 years after the medium is invented, it's like everywhere. It's everyone's reading comic books, and they're like newspapers. They're just like tossed out, you know, like you'd read them like a newspaper, like you'd read a newspaper and then you toss them out.
You just throw them away. No one's collecting these comics.
Like, yeah, no one collected comic books. Okay, so in the 50s, people would collect comics, but they wouldn't collect them like a collector. That started happening in the 70s.
I mean, more like how you would keep books on a shelf. Like, I'm not just throwing away books after I finish reading them. I sell them, the half-price books.
Sure, but these were seen like magazines. Do you like? A lot of people throw out magazines now. It's just we're after the 70s now. Yeah. Things like seem like they have value, but back then, you know, that's why some of these things, like there were millions of them, but they're not around anymore, because they're like in landfills or they got burned.
Plus, if this was in the 20s, I think you said,
this is it was kind of invented in the 30s, and then by the time it was selling like crazy, comic books as a medium were selling, and this is after after the invention of the superhero. That was in the 40s, and that's when it really took off. And then World War II happened, and superhero books got like incredibly popular. Superman, Namor, Captain America, and they got popular because American soldiers would take them with them and like leave them around like all over the world, right?
Okay.
And so Captain Marvel, all of that, like they became huge and ubiquitous. And basically when the war ended, like these soldiers came back home, they'd seen like the atrocities of war, and like superheroes were just like, they were boring at that point because they'd read that shit overseas. And a lot of the superhero stuff was like super jingoistic. Like they weren't going to buy that bullshit when they got back home, and they're like fucked up. Right.
Yeah.
So these soldiers, and like, you know, everyone comes back from World War II, and it's like, this shit's not cutting it. Right. And in comes this book called Crime Does Not Pay. And crime is like, just that blows up even bigger than superheroes.
Who puts out Crime Does Not Pay?
It might have been Timely. I'm not sure what the publisher was. It's certainly defunct now. It could have been a precursor to EC.
Is this I assume a crime comic book?
Yeah. So these
anthology?
Are like, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And this is the precursor to horror. Like this is like directly where horror comes from. So these are like super lurid, super sensational, super violent. Most of their plots are like a man killing a woman who's usually his wife or his girlfriend, or is like, and she's like depicted as like nagging or whatever. They're super sexist, right? And then he gets like either gunned down by like a rival gang, or he gets fried by the electric chair or whatever. And they spawn a bunch of spinoffs, and they become more and more violent. and more about the crime and the punishment of the crime than anything like a plot. But people ate it up, and it wasn't like really like a mystery or anything like that. It's like they were kind of, they're not great. They haven't aged well. But then, okay, so like let's jump back to like Max Gaines, right? The guy who invented what is a comic book, right?
Yeah.
He was taking the newspaper strips and making that shit back then. So he's like on this yacht or something, like hanging out with his billionaire friends, right? Because he's made a bunch of money off of comic books. He falls off his yacht, gets chopped up into little bits by the propeller or something.
Wait,
right?
What? He fell off his yacht?
Yeah. And gets killed by the propeller or something super graphic.
I assume comic books paid for this yacht.
Yeah. So,
wow. Was he just drunk? Was he doing a trick, like a jackass
dude,
stunt?
he was flattening his dick out. He was flattening his dick out like a pancake.
Yeah.
And he just, it was the least painful trick that he could have done. And then he just backflips off and hits the propeller hard, bleeds to death, right?
We've all been there, man. Yeah. Okay. So, wow.
So,
I
so
hope I
he's
die
out.
like that. Yeah, that's awesome.
He's out. And meanwhile, his like kind of like hippie son, and this is in the late 40s. His son is like, I don't want anything to do with like the family fortune. I don't care about comic books or whatever. He's like some teacher in some small town or some shit. But then he hears about, his dad dies, and like he's got to like come back and like, save the day or whatever, like take over the family, the family tradition, right?
Dude, this is the plot of like an HBO show.
Dude, I know that's what I'm fucking saying. This and the guys who created Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they need the guys who created Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, that dude fucking bought a tank.
For what reason? Like, did that help him get the comic made? Well, this was after he got rich. He's like, I'm gonna buy a tank now.
Dude, he got rich and he was like, that guy had they had like no money. That's a side tangent. They were fucking printing those books like out of the back of like Volkswagens and shit, slinging that shit like mixtapes, and they became multimillionaires. They sold that shit to like Fox or something, Viacom or something like that.
And that's where I think my brother's getting his crack pipe updates from. I asked him for a link, and he said, "No link, man. It's all over the news."
Dude, it's on the news. It's on the Twitter, dude. It's on the Parler.
Did that get shut down? I think so.
I hope so.
I don't know. I lost a lot of followers, if so.
So Bill Gaines, this guy's son, he looks at these these crime comics, and he's like, yo, this is just horror. And he's like, he makes Tales from the Crypt in the 1950s, right?
Fill some context. How old is Bill at this point when he comes back and takes over his father's legacy?
I think he's in mid-20s.
Wow, this is such a good plot.
Yes, I know, dude. It's so fucking good. So he comes back and he's like, he's seeing what's selling, and he's like, nah, like this is horror. Like, let's just do horror. And there were like Adventures of Frankenstein. I've seen some horror books that predate Tales from the Crypt, but they're not like Tales from the Crypt is an evolution of Crime Does Not Pay. Like it's similarly formatted, and it has like this host, the Crypt Keeper, and I'm sure the audience has probably heard of Tales from the Crypt. I don't know if they're aware, but it was originally a comic book from the 1950s. I think there was a huge TV show in the 80s, and everyone read that shit. Like little baby Stephen King, probably little baby Joe R. Lansdale, like all of those people, they were reading those books, and becomes like insanely popular.
So Tales from the Crypt was like the OG then. Yeah,
Tales from the Crypt is the OG. They did their own spin-offs like Vault of Horror, or Vault of Terror. EC had a line of these like similar rip. They would create something and they would rip themselves off, and then there would be like a million other publishers that would just rip them off and do their own version of it.
Do you know much about, like, I know he wanted to create a Hill comic because of the crime, but like how like Tales from the Crypt specifically was like conceived, and like the Crypt Keeper and all of that?
I think the Crypt Keeper was, I think he was created in another magazine that they were doing, but then he kind of got his own series, and I think I'm not sure where they got the idea of like wanting a host. I'm assuming that came from television.
Oh, okay. Because I haven't read any comics of this kind in a long time. I used to have a bunch as a kid, and I recall like the Crypt Keeper always like being in the comics. Am I just misremembering this?
No, you're remembering correctly. So the Crypt Keeper would, on the first page, a lot of times he would introduce the scene, kind of like a Rod Serling introducing the scene. And side note, I don't have this on my notes, but speaking of Rod Serling, they actually have, I think it's in like Witch's Tales. I can send it to you at some point, but Rod Serling just fucking ripped off these unknown writers, right? So Rod Serling wrote Planet of the Apes, right?
Did he?
Yes.
I did not know that.
He wrote,
I only know him from the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, Twilight Zone's great, right?
Yeah.
But those stories are also very formulaic, and they're also very fucking like these stories from, a decade earlier, right? Or half a decade earlier. So I know for a fact that he's taking ideas from comics, because Planet of the Apes was a novel, right? But the movie is nothing like the novel. And I was reading this. It's one of the Harvey books, and it's like the exact same story as the Planet of the Apes, but they're not apes. They're just like these eyeless men in the future, right? And there's like the iconic scene of the Statue of Liberty, spoiler alert, the Statue of Liberty in one of those early like 50s comics. And it's just like, wow, this feels so fucking stolen. And like no one talks about that. Like I was like looking online, like no one mentioned this because no one knows who the writer is. No one knows who the fucking artist is. There's nowhere to give credit. So I guess like Rod Serling is a genius. I love him, but he definitely got his ideas from books like Vault of Horror and their ilk.
We're gonna cancel this guy today. This guy is fucking done. Time's up.
But yeah, so they were saying like there was some kind of research that they did in the 50s that each kid would like read one of these comics, and they would trade this comic like up to 5 times before it either wore out or they threw it out. And so there was like collecting, but it wasn't like collecting like baseball cards or something. It wasn't collecting for value. It was a different type of collecting.
Hold on. How was this research conducted?
I forget.
I have ideas. I have thoughts. This is what, the 1950s, yes?
50s, yeah.
1950s, also like the popularity of a Strange Old Angel, yes?
Yeah.
Well, these creeps just really people with EC doing studies on kids with comics?
I hope so.
That's all. It was just a big misunderstanding, man. I think that's what's going on. Anyway, proceed.
All right, so like this happens in 1950, right? That's when the explosion of horror comics happened. So and everything's like good for like a year, right? But then the fucking villainous shit goes down, and there's this kind of narrative in the media that starts brewing that's like there's this increase in crime across America. And I don't know anything about crime statistics in the 1950s, so I don't know if that's true or not. There was a narrative of that in the media. Another moral panic starts happening, and the complete villain of the story and the villain of like horror comics and kind of comics in general pops up here in the early 1950s, probably like 51 or so. And his name's Frederick Wertham. You might have heard of him. He wrote a book called it's a like a total pop psychology bullshit book called Seduction of the Innocent. And
Yikes.
dude, it's very problematic. It's like it's homophobic, it's racist. I mean, it's homophobic because it's like, hey, you know, Batman and Robin, they're gay, and that's bad. And
Because for how long, even still now, I mean, people would say, oh, gay people are also pedophiles because they're gay.
yeah, and that's the type of stuff that he was saying in that book. And he was also saying like it's causing violence and the degradation of women. And there are like two incidences that actually happened where there was a kid who hung himself with the belt, and I think he was like 10. And his mother claimed that he was play acting out a scene from, you know, something that he saw in one of the horror books. And then there was another one where it was a teenager like tied a kid to a tree in like, you know, 51 or 52 and like tortured him to death. Right.
Did he tie him to a tree with a comic book?
No. But cool. he said that the comic books made him do it. Right.
Yeah.
And so then there's like this kind of fervor. But as a side note, I feel like I have to say this, like, because I'm talking about violence in media. But I don't know have you ever read, or do you know who John E. Douglas is?
No.
This is my disclaimer. So he wrote Anatomy of Motive. He's actually the guy who you've watched Mindhunters, right?
Yeah.
So he's the guy that character, the main character, is based off of. He invented violent criminal profiling and criminal psychology, right? And he's like claims that there's like no correlation, no causation between media and violent crime, like at all. That there is like in very rare circumstances, there's like non-violent crimes that are related to media, and those are fraud cases. And that's like someone will see like someone rob a bank, or not rob a bank, but like usually commit some kind of fraud, and then they try to recreate it. But like it's not correlated to violent crime. So I always feel like whenever I'm discussing like violence in media, I always like to talk about him, because he's an expert, and he's basically saying like it's not giving me a pass or whatever, or giving creators a pass, but I just feel like it's worth noting that the most expert person on violent crime says there is no correlation to media and violence, media consumed.
It's also worth noting that you and I recently went to the theater to see the new Jackass movie, and immediately after we vandalized a fountain.
We also vandalized our penises, and now we have pancake flat dicks. So.
So let's go take a ride on that private yacht you just bought and see what happens.
So anyways,
yes.
50s churches start getting pissed off. They have like book burnings. Like that happened in America, where nuns would like give bounties for comic books. Like they would pay like a penny or whatever to like kids to confiscate their books. And so like millions of these comic books were burned, and kids would like hide after school. Like they'd like jump other kids. If they knew that they were holding comics, right? Because they would have like a bounty, right? They get paid by these nuns.
Yeah.
So like these kids would be like walking home from school and just get their ass beat and their comics stolen. And then, you know, and then there was like the social, like, you're bad for reading comic books started being a thing. So, you know, you could get beat up. You could, you know, get your comic book stolen and burned right in front of you. And then the nuns, you know, would pay your bully for stealing your comics. So
you think the nuns beat anyone up?
Dude, for sure. Like,
yeah.
They would.
I'm also thinking, like, if that was me, I would just be making some shitty counterfeit comic books and just selling them to the nuns. I mean, the nuns don't know quality.
Yeah. I mean, they would just see a cover, right? You could probably just tear up one comic book and make like a dozen.
Dude, and fucking wrap it around a holy Bible and fucking make them
some Bibles, dude. Let's burn some Bibles.
We should.
So there's like this pressure on lawmakers, you know, as this narrative grows, to crack down on the industry. And eventually they hold these televised hearings, and Frederick Wortham gets up and he does a spiel that's like totally anti-comic book, and pressure mounts. And eventually Bill Gaines, who ostensibly his father invented comic books and he invented the horror comic book, he's called up to speak at these hearings. And allegedly he had done a bunch of speed and kind of like studied up and stayed up all night. But they like grill him for like hours and hours.
Wow.
In these Senate hearings.
And he's been up all night.
And he's been up all night, like trying to prep for this, right?
I want to know, like, how, like, did he admit to this? Like, how is this knowledge that he stood up all night on speed beforehand?
Oh yeah, no. He's like said that. He's like admitted this, right? Because
in the beginning of the thing, like, just so you know, Lionel, I've been up all night.
No. Like much later, because there's a lot of like, I wouldn't say there's a lot of scholarly research done about this, but there's enough because it was a phenomenon. So he's berated for like hours, and like he starts cracking because like at first, but eventually like the speed starts like wearing off, and like 3 or 4 hours in, he starts sweating, and the senator asks him like, is there any limit to like what you would put in your magazine? And he's like, yeah, there is a limit. It's like, I'll only publish things that are within good taste, right? Which is a totally subjective thing. And so the senator, and for everyone to fucking see, he holds up a comic book of this guy like holding a woman's bloody head and holding an axe, and it's like dripping blood everywhere. He's like, well, is this in good taste? And Gaines is just like, yeah, I think it's in good taste.
I love this guy.
Yeah. And so he's just like, and like he could have said like, we had gone rounds of edits, like we had edits. Allegedly he had done multiple rounds of edits to kind of actually cut back a little bit on the level of gratuitous violence. And I think he said a little bit of that after he said, yes, I think it's in good taste. I think he said, the head could be dripping more blood or whatever, just stupid shit but it's like, there's no good answer for that question that you can say like, is this fucking rag like in good taste? And it's like, that's a subjective question. This is freedom of fucking speech here. What do you say? Like, what are you saying?
Yeah. Like, also, I'm just a guy publishing a fucking spooky comic book. I'm not someone who comes up and speaks like this. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
Like, imagine if I had to go up and do that. I would get arrested immediately.
I know. I mean, basically, like, I feel like he almost did. So, I mean, after that, it was just like public opinion. And this happened in 1954, right? So, like, the comic book of horror boom was really only 4 years long. It lasted from 50 to I guess 55, but 54 is like when the downturn happened, and the comic industry was like facing self-censorship, which has happened in every other medium. Like, right? Like if you look at TV and film, like video
nasties. I mean, I did a huge episode on video nasties not that long ago. If anyone listening wants to check it out, I mean, this shit is not new.
Yeah, it's not new. And I mean, I guess, and there's something called like Hays Code. So in the 1930s, in the early 1930s, there was some very raunchy, violent, some nudity in movies. And by the 40s, there was nothing like that. And that was because of the Hays Code. And I think that might have been a legal thing, but I know for sure they did self-censor. I mean, we still self-censor. And I'm not saying we shouldn't. I do like that it's not like a legal thing, right? Because in comic books, there was like in the 50s, there were some cities that were like, because they haven't done this, some cities were like, we have to take it upon ourselves. And like with video nasties, there were certain jurisdictions you couldn't buy or sell or own certain types of, it became like paraphernalia or whatever, right? This really similar thing. I think it was only in a couple of cities for comic books, because the industry like learned very quickly, like we had to set up something immediately. And then from there it was a fucking coup. Like they're like, who's the top dog? And it's like, all right, the horror comic is the top dog. It's EC Comics. And so basically like DC and Timely, which is like a precursor to Marvel, like they were like, fuck romance books, fuck horror books. They might have even said like fuck westerns. They're like, fuck all of this stuff that we don't publish. And we're gonna like take on the big guy and we're gonna censor the fuck out of him. And so they made it to where like they were part of the boards, right?
Who is this now?
This is an industry board called the Comics Code Authority.
Okay.
And it's a very popular thing. You've probably seen the stamp. It was introduced in 55 or 54, and it ran through mid 70s. And then eventually it got removed due to superhero comics. Some superhero comics where they just said, fuck it. I don't care that it's approved or not, because they want to talk about drugs or whatever they want to talk about. But
you'll see, just to kind of segue, you see the same thing happening now with movies. Well, now a lot of movies don't even bother to get rated because you don't need to. And there's no point. Like if you know the movie's going to get an L rating, there's no point even trying to, unless you want it to play like nationwide in theaters. You can just release it and it's fine.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, with streaming services, like the streaming service itself sets its own rating. So it's like, why would you need, right? Because they're the ones that say, and their ratings just completely arbitrary.
Like my movie, nope, we didn't get it rated at all. And I was so surprised. And I asked that, like the director, like, well, why are we not going to get this rated? And he was like, oh, we don't need to. It doesn't. We already know what it's going to get, so there's no point in wasting all the money it would cost to submit it. So I guess it's like super expensive to even get a rating on a movie.
It just feels like a way to control and suppress.
Yeah.
Like a lot of these, well, I'll bring up a specific example that happened with Bill Gaines, which is just really fucked up. But it just feels like a way for like a certain person who's in control, and it's just random, right? Like Bill Gates had a lot of power for a short amount of time, and then his enemies were like, fuck zombies, fuck werewolves, fuck vampires, we made that illegal, like which is ridiculous, right?
So
there were no right. So after 55 up until like 71, there are no vampire comics. I mean, there are, but they would be probably magazines, and so they wouldn't have been rated, right? Yeah. There are things like there's creepy magazine. There are a couple magazines that got around that, right?
So it's like it's still an actual list they made, like vampires, nope. Zombies, nope. Like specific creatures. That's so hilarious.
There's specific creatures
fucked up.
There's specific actions usually done by women that are, and that was just to get rid of romance comics. We're not doing a podcast on romance comics, but there was like to me, like in retrospect, what looks like a very targeted attack on certain publishers that were like, well, their lines are XYZ. Like these are the titles that they publish. They make a shit ton of money off of like horror books and romance books and westerns. Let's fucking ruin them.
Yeah.
And so like basically that was like the end of like the horror era for EC for the 50s. And what we call that before that time, we call those, what I was saying earlier, you can go to the store, you can go to half price and get pre-code classics. A lot of those too, you can probably find free online because they're most of them are public domain, because like those publishers just, they immediately died. Like they lost all of their ability to make any money. And so the rights are just, anyone has the rights, you know, to almost all of that stuff. So you can find like a bunch of stuff, and I love it. It's like totally up my alley. A lot of it's really weird. A lot of it's formulaic. You know, they have like the Back from the Dead stories. They have like their ghost stories. They have their witch stories. You know, if you've read one, it's like you've read 10 of them.
So would you say like these pre-code comics are probably what inspired House of Blood the most?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yes, there is some code books that I really like. I really like the art in I mean, House of Mystery and House of Secrets are hugely influential. And those are 70s books, and those are both published by DC. And Marvel did horror books. They did like Tomb of Dracula, and those books are like, they're pretty tame.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically nothing from the late 50s and nothing from the 60s. Just not interested in it. It's just not any. It either doesn't exist, or it's like it's completely tame because it had to around those censors.
And what would happen if they broke that?
Okay, so I have an example I want to bring up where, you know, they basically just like Caesared like Bill Gaines. Like they're like, Julius Caesar, just stab him in the back, right? That's how it feels like to me. So he couldn't make horror comics, so he started doing weird fantasy and like science fiction stories, and he reprinted this book, this story that he had done maybe like a year earlier, and it's a story about an astronaut who's like in the far future, and he's from Earth, and he's looking at this planet, and this planet is full of like androids, and some of the androids are blue and some of the androids are red, and they're very violent towards each other. And the astronaut is like, hey, you know, we wanted to welcome you into the Earth Federation, but you guys are just not sophisticated enough because, you know, you're too you know, you're not elevated enough or whatever, right? So, and he's like in his astronaut gear the whole time. He takes off in the final page, he takes off his helmet. It's an African American astronaut, and the censors were like, you have to make this guy white.
Oh, what is this?
Comics Code Authority was like, you have to make this guy white.
When did this come out? The 60s or the 50s? Still?
This came out like 50, maybe like 56.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
okay.
Right. So yeah, I mean, racism was abundant, right? So, but Bill Gaines is like, no.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Like, this is what the
dude is awesome.
Yeah, this guy's awesome. He's like, I'm not fucking doing that. And in fact, I'm gonna fucking hold a press conference about how you motherfuckers are racist.
Yeah.
If you don't do this. And he puts that note and sends it back. They send back this like, these edits are like, well, you know, he's sweating a lot on his forehead, so, you know, remove the sweat from his forehead. And he just sent back, fuck you. And it printed, right? But it didn't have the Comics Code stamp of approval. He said, you know, fuck you. Like, I'm running it as is. And I think that was like the very last like story that he ran. And then he kind of has like a slightly uplifting story in that you've heard of Mad Magazine, right?
Yes.
So Mad Magazine is actually, it started off as a comic book. It started off as a spoof of like all of EC's stuff. This was like Stan Lee's bullpen shenanigans, like where he had like people who had personalities and stuff like that you would know in editorial and caricatures like before the 60s, right? So he basically created that with like a spoof on like the Tales from the Crypt with Mad. And then
did he create Mad Magazine?
Yeah, he did. And then he turned it into a magazine so it wouldn't get censored. Hell? Yeah. Wow. And so then that had a million knockoffs. Yeah. But that started off as a comic book.
Wow, I had no idea that he was also the guy who did Mad. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So I mean, it's like you see,
guy's done a lot.
He did a lot. Yeah. So you kind of see like this like evolution of like horror spikes in the 50s and then comedy in the 60s, and it's yeah, I mean,
What a life. How did he die? Is he alive?
I'm not sure. I think he died
he
recently.
fucking fell into a yacht.
Yeah, just like his dad. He went out just like his
The
dad.
same blood. Dude, I think this yacht is like haunted.
I call him Bill Gaines. I guess you could also call him William Gaines. I don't know why
I know how names work.
Let's see. When did this guy die? 90s? I don't know. 90s maybe. 92. Died at age 70. Hey, that's pretty good.
That's pretty good. I'm looking up his death. Doesn't say on Wikipedia. How odd. It just says he fucking died in 92. He was an atheist.
Oh yeah, I love that bit. There's something on Wikipedia that says he once told a reporter that his was probably the only home in America in which the children were brought up to believe in Santa Claus but not God.
Wow, I like this guy.
Yeah, I love him. I mean, they need to make a movie about him.
Well, like I'm saying, man, this feels like a fucking television show. Just like the whole process, fighting the censorship, man. It'd be good.
Well, that and like I didn't do like I didn't do a good job of like maybe explaining how the work environment, which was a lot Please like do. The Marvel bullpen. Like,
do you want to explain that?
Sure.
I mean, okay, well, let's take like a 5-minute break to pee and get some coffee and stuff. Let this dog out. All right.
Bye.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Is this good or is this boring?
I'm loving it. Is this how you want it to go?
Sure. I mean, I don't know. I'm disclaimer, I'm not a comic book historian. I'm
a lot.
I'm a fan.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of fun, interesting facts, and I'm enjoying this. I do think it'd make a good show.
I think so too, but dude, I'm telling you, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle guys, like that is a true rags to riches shit because like Bill Gaines, like, his dad fucking invented comic books and he was probably a shitter and had the means to also, I think, he would pay people nothing, to get their IPs. And it's just like, I just love that the American story is the story of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
When was this happening? The same time?
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
Yeah.
That happened in the early 80s.
Oh, okay.
So they were inspired by a lot of these. I mean, they were hugely inspired by Jack Kirby, who I mentioned earlier. I'm a fan of his work. I'm not a fan of his horror work. And Joe Simon created a publishing house called, they released a book called Black Magic that was a horror anthology, but it's like, if you just like flip through those pages, there's like no blood, like there's nothing like salacious. And I think they were really trying to make comic books for kids. Whereas Bill Gaines was like, he was trying to have fun. Oh, and like kind of what I was about to say before the break was like, those guys, they had like this, like, hey, check out what I'm working on over here kind of vibe. Like, hey, look at this real quick. And like, isn't this fucked up? And like one artist, would lean over and be like, oh man, that's fucked up. I have to outdo what he's doing over here. Like, I gotta just one up him. And he would work on the, him and Al, I could be wrong here, Al Feldstein, I think, would do the almost all of the EC scripts together. And like personally, I don't know. I don't think I mentioned this. I might have mentioned this to you. I don't think I've mentioned this on the podcast right now, but I'm not the biggest fan of EC because they're very predictable. And if you look at an EC just visually, it's like, I don't know, like it could be 60% text on the page. Like as far as the layout, so much of it is dedicated to like, I mean, you might as well read a novel. Like at that point, yeah, just get the fucking audiobook of Sandman and listen to that instead of reading a comic book. Well, like what, and they would have the best artists too. Like EC had the fucking best artists, and they would be like these panels would be like 1 inch tall by 2 inches long, because there would be like 3 inches of by 4 inches of fucking text everywhere. So I mean, that's just like how, I guess, how I feel, but like a lot of the ripoffs would have like less than half that text.
Well, it feels like if you're making a comic book, you need to. I mean, what makes it different from a book is the fucking illustrations. And you should embrace that, Bill.
I'm not, I don't always do this like consciously, or I try to do it consciously, but it's very hard to do. But basically, like juxtaposing the written word with the image is like something that you can only do in comic books. So I think that's something that Alan Moore is like a complete master of. Like show something, and you read like the contrast. Like sometimes it can be like the exact opposite of what you're seeing, and that can be like really beautiful.
Can you think of a good example of that from one of his books?
I can't, but I do know like a lot of, and this has been aped a lot. You'll see like a lot of like visuals, and it's like Rorschach's like voice and writing over that, where it's just like really, really bleak. And I think that kind of juxtaposition, I know, like you can basically, like you can tell two stories at once. Like you can tell like a visual narrative in comic books, and you can caption out either the thought process of someone in that scene, which in film you can do with voiceover, but it's really cringe and it hasn't aged well. Like in a lot of cases, that doesn't age well. Like voiceover is like, can be kind of weird, or it like falls flat if you don't have like the perfect acting. But that goes so well in comic books, where so one thing that I did in Spellslinger is like I have the opening scene is like this dead girl that's like floating over the main character, and it's like as horrific as it can be, and he's just like, just the captions are just like him just being irritated. He's like, is this like some sort of sex thing, or like what's happening? Why are you here? So like having this visual that tells one story, and then you can either undercut it, or you can play, you can riff, you can be funny with like very serious visuals. I don't know. That's to me, like you should build comic books. Like you should do things in comics that can only be done in comic books. And it's like, if you're just telling a story that's like, if you're describing what is visually being seen, then you're doing a disservice to the audience. Like you're just filling up, you're just taking their time away from them. It's like they can get all of that, the wet road, the fucking thunder and the storm, and like the guy walking across the street. You don't have to say that like in a caption, but EC will, like the Crypt Keeper will like explain all of that.
Makes no
and
sense.
Show it.
Makes no sense. You're just wasting time, wasting page. I understand what you're saying, and I agree. Like I said, it's been forever since I've read any EC comics, so I have no way of like compiling anything. But what you're saying sounds like what was probably in those. So I'm not going to call you a liar on this.
But well, I am a liar, but
yeah,
maybe not about this.
That is true. And yeah, I mean, like with movies, I always think it's such fucking bullshit when you spend so much time with like someone narrating the movie It's like, just write a book if you want to do that. Show me something on a visual medium. And comics will just same thing, man. Like, stop wasting so much time with text unless it's gonna like benefit the fucking visuals. Like, how did you like going into House of Blood with that mindset? Like, what did you like? Did that affect how the book came out?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are some things where I would really try to. So Bog Night, the first Bog Night story, is really, really inspired by Swamp Thing and and especially Man Thing, which was more mature because it was Marvel was trying to do an R-rated book, and it wasn't Comics Code Authority approved. It was a magazine. It lasted one fucking issue. And then it got pulled.
What magazine was this?
I think it was called Savage Tales of Conan.
Okay.
Or maybe it might have just been called Savage Tales.
Yeah.
But yeah, just you can look it up. Man Thing first appearance that's the book, and I there's a lot of flowery dialogue, and it's kind of like a little bit like the opposite of what I just explained. But it's like I am kind of a sucker as long as it's building mood and not wasting time. I can get away, like you can get away with that. Like you can't hear a picture. So like, do you fucking hear the katydids or whatever? Like, do you hear the can you smell the fucking swamp? You know, that kind of thing. Like those are the types of choices that I would make in captions when I'm doing like a kind of like a more of an omniscient narrator, which is not the case for all the stories. But in that one in particular, I'm really trying to create like a raunchy like 1970s story that has that similar kind of aesthetic and style.
Yeah. Okay. And it would make sense, I think, what you're saying, to focus on the senses that you can't see. If you take away sight, what else do you have? I mean, smell is always something. I know you hate writers. You don't want to talk about anyone who writes. Like when I write something, I always am conscious of smell, because I think that's a sense a lot of writers kind of forget about, but it adds so much to anything someone reads. I think
like the sound of animals in the night, you know, what are those bird calls sound like? You know,
Yeah.
is there something that you can like talk about that fills space in the reader's mind between panels?
The sound,
so like
the sound of animals in the night. It's called making love.
yeah. So and you know, you can also say things like, you know, the evil blah blah blah, whereas, you know, visually something might seem less ominous visually, but you know, you can just really ham it up. As long as it's like an omniscient narrator, right? Because sometimes there are no captions, and that's fine. Like manga, modern comics now are a lot more like manga than they were in the 80s. Frank Miller was a huge fan, and he's basically kind of like got a lot of Americans into manga, and it has a completely different pace. There's rarely any captions. There's maybe 1/5 of the amount of dialogue, and that has to do with like it's a different medium. Like it's one person versus a team of creators. Like the people that I use for House of Blood, it's, you know, I write, quote unquote, I may write
what
I do create stories.
Yeah.
And I letter and I edit, and but then there's also some people can't do those things. Some people need an editor, some people need, you know, a letterer, an inker, a penciler, a colorist. Those are all different people, right? And so it could be like a team of 5 or more people creating one comic on a monthly basis. Now in Japan, it's totally different. It's on a fucking weekly basis, and it's almost the same amount of pages. It's about the same amount of pages. So, and it's one mangaka. Oh, one creator typically. I mean, they'll have assistants, but they don't give them credit. So
they just lock these guys in like a fucking office and say you can't leave for the rest of your life.
It's horrible.
I feel like
it's horrible. Look,
that's like
up.
That's like me with the podcast, man. Just podcast after podcast,
dude. It's the bunch of Max Boots.
I don't get paid.
It's just. I wonder if I'll see the cherry blossoms next winter.
Oh shit! Can you?
Yeah, dude. You should like check out the creator of Berserk.
Yeah.
He has like these quotes before he died from working himself to death last year. He has these quotes. He's like, another year inside, I wonder if I'll see the cherry blossoms next year.
Oh no, I can
or like,
oh no, I can relate to all of this.
He's like, I went outside to have like dinner with the publisher, and then came home. I won't do that for another 8 months or something like that. And it's just like, oh my fucking god. But when you see that art, like just like look up Berserk art and listener, like seriously, look up Berserk horror and you'll be like, Berserk horror manga.
Looking it up. Holy shit. Why didn't you give me this book to read?
It's not a horror book.
Yes, it is. What are you talking about?
I know, right? It's also, I don't know if you would like it. It's much more of like a Game of Thrones dark fantasy. But artistically, it's just when you look at those visuals, it's like this guy's not. He doesn't have time to go outside. Like he's plotting, he's drawing, he's like penciling, inking that shit. Like the amount of detail that goes into that. It's just insane.
What do you mean Game of Thrones-y? Like incest? What's happening? I'm okay with incest.
I mean, there's worse stuff than that in that book. It's
like dragons and like slaying things with blades. That's what you mean? Like a fantasy book?
Yeah, it's a fantasy. Right. It's like a dark fantasy.
I'm okay with that.
It's very, very good. I can let you buy. I got like 15 tankobons.
Yeah.
You can borrow.
I don't know what that means.
It's like a volume. It's like volume
okay.
1 or whatever.
Gotcha.
Each of them has like 5 chapters.
Cool. I would check that out. His stuff looks great. That's depressing though. Everything you just said. He didn't even get to see the new Jackass movie.
I know.
He missed out.
He didn't even get a flat in his dick.
He doesn't know how the series ended. How did he die? I mean, like you say, he worked himself to death. Like, did he just like collapse on his fucking pencil or however you draw?
Honestly, I think he might have. I think he had like some kind of heart troubles or something that, you know.
I was reading this interview with Danielle Steele, I think the last name is, the one who writes like 80 books a year, like fucking romance or mystery books.
Oh yeah.
You always see like shelves and shelves of old books, but no one reads what she writes, so I'm not positive what she does. But I was reading an interview and she sleeps like maybe at the most 5 hours a night, and then she just writes for 20 or 22 hours straight, and she just has help who will like bring plates of food and leave them on the table, and like she won't even like be conscious of the fact that she's eating. She just writes nonstop, and like that.
Change the bucket. Change the bucket.
That's the dream, man. Shitting in a bucket.
I want someone to fucking change my shit bucket. That's how successful of a writer I want to be.
Now, was this guy like? Did he get paid well for his writing? His not just writing, but like creating this series.
So it's super popular.
Yeah.
I'm assuming he made a lot of money. I don't know a lot about how much manga creators make.
Yeah.
We should talk about this a little bit, because comic book creators don't make a lot of money. It's actually really it's pretty heartbreaking. I think that mangaka, who are the people, they typically will write and draw, and they do everything. They're creators, and they're creatively owned, right? These come out on a weekly basis. They come out in a anthology magazine So this is so cool. It's like, why can't we have something like this in America where, well, I mean, it's very brutal on the creators, right? But how wonderful would it be to have like a monthly anthology, or sorry, a weekly anthology magazine that's like 300 pages that's delivered, to your store, and you get to keep up on a weekly basis of like, I would love that. I would love ingesting it that way. Like that would be almost preferable than other ways of ingesting media,
right?
For just like for my preferences. But yeah, so I think they're creator owners. I think that they're paid very pretty well. I think they're paid very well.
Like at that point, what's the point of getting paid well anyway, right? So did he have time? Like, did he even have time to enjoy his success?
I think that there are people out there where success is a different thing to different people.
Success is dying in a shit bucket, man.
Right. So like, I have a job where I feel like no matter how successful of a writer that I become, like
of a what?
It's of a
I'm sorry.
You motherfucker.
Stop pointing.
No, I appreciate it. Can you actually censor every time I refer to myself as a writer? That would be fucking fantastic. That's a lot of work for
Who
you.
am I?
Though, right?
Who am I? Bill Gaines? You censoring me?
Whoa, you're the comic code authority. But can you go ahead and censor me? Okay, so I think that some people's like idea of success is not like people. There's some creators that are like, I don't want a big home. I don't want these kind of like life luxuries. Yeah. I want to create art. I want to tell a story of like this fucking guy with one arm and a big sword, and he shoots a cannon out of his hand or whatever,
Yeah.
Like that's what he wants to make 40 volumes of that or whatever. And that's like that's what brings him joy as much as it probably brings him sadness.
All right. I guess just I'm stuck on the weekly deadline thing. Just sounds like absolute hell. But I'm also someone who is really bad with being productive quickly. So maybe that's just my get up.
Yeah, same way. I mean, that's why it's like I can't. Prose is so hard to write. Like prose is not only so hard to write, it's like so hard to pace. It's so hard to do like all this shit. It's like you can't thumbnail prose. Like I can thumbnail a fucking comic book. I know exactly when things need to happen and where. But like you can like let's say you want to start describing a scene, right? That's just immediately going to slow down your pace. And so it's just like this level of like how descriptive do I need to be? Am I being vague? I know a lot of like you're not using like Conan style flowery like sword and sorcery levels of descriptions. And it's like, yeah, because now like if people do that, it's just like I love that stuff. I think it's master. Like I love Robert E. Howard. I think he's one of the greatest writers ever. But it's like I'll fucking fall asleep in like half the Conan stories because it's like, I don't need to know what this thing looks like at like the 50% mark of.
Well, it's crazy like comparing that to a comic because it will take you however long to get through this one description compared to a comic. Well, you see it within a second and you just move on to the next panel. And it delivers like the same thing almost. Like it's also painting a picture. It's straight up painting a fucking picture, which is what prose is attempting to do, but you don't have to use your imagination.
Well, right. And I think for the creator, like for the writer, it's just so much easier. Like for me, I mean, because I've done it more than I've done prose probably.
Yeah.
It's easier because it's like you're making a collaborative effort with someone else who's doing a significant amount of the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
Like
I haven't written a comic. I want to, but I'm trying to think about this and it seems like it would be easier like describing something, because you can just be really mechanical, like the grass is green. You don't have to like come up with a cool way to phrase it that the reader isn't going to roll the eyes at, because no one's reading it besides the person drawing it.
It's an internal document.
Yeah.
Like you like reference pictures and just like a page of like, what does this mechanically look like? You don't even have to be fucking accurate in your like sentence structure. Like you can just list, you know, how it's supposed to look, and even maybe even thumbnail some stuff out.
Yeah.
Versus like if you were to do that in a certain like a more of an action scene in a novel, it just wouldn't fucking work, you know, because it would be like, why are we slowing down to like describe the interior of a house? And it's like, so okay, well then I need to put the interior of the house earlier in the scene. But it's like, you know, I don't know, it's like for me, I'm starting to lose those skills, like because I've been away from, I only ever do prose is if I'm invited to an anthology. And so it's basically like never.
Right.
So,
but sounds like maybe
that's where I fall.
Fuck prose for you. I mean,
fuck prose,
comics.
dude.
I mean, you'll thriving
writers.
You'll thriving with comics. I feel like this like feels like the thing you were meant to do. I've read House of Blood. It's great. I don't know who wrote it, but I mean, props to them. Well, I do want to talk about that, because you do have this whole thing that you say how there's no riddles in House of Blood, and that has to do with the old Hill comics that we've been discussing all day. And we haven't talked about the creators of these comics yet, really. We talked about Gaines, like the publishers, but not those who were writing them. So what can you tell me about that?
Well, so Gaines did do writing, I guess, like with Al Felstein. I believe that's who that is. But again, I'm not a historian. So some of those people, Jack Kirby, he was writing and drawing. Stan Lee would have, I mean, he was doing horror comics back then too, but back then no one received credits, and artists, it's a little bit easier to give credit to, right? Because you can see the way an artist does the lines. And if they become famous, like Wally West or whatever, Wally Wood, you can tell, like you can give credit to these artists after the fact, right? But the writers, it's just so much harder, especially because a lot of it's so formulaic. In some cases, anyone could have been the writer, you know? So
was this like a case of like in some cases, the person who illustrated it also wrote it. They just were like, fuck it, I don't need to put my name on it. Or just...
Oh no. So the publishers wouldn't allow this.
What? So
there were some small cases where people would get deals.
Yeah.
And that was so if you've ever heard of fucking Bob Kane, he created Batman. He got it like in some kind of contract with the precursor to DC, or it might have been DC at the time, right? That he was the creator. And so he was well compensated, but he was actually a co-creator. Bill Finger, a lot of comic people know, if people who aren't listening, he was actually just a co-creator on Batman. Joe Simon and Schuster, the two kids who created, I mean, they were literally like 16 years old and they sold Superman for like $100. Superman's literally worth billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And, you know, these people have just been, these comic creators have just made essentially pennies, fractions of pennies on the dollar for their contributions, while these mega corporations like Disney and Warner Brothers have just fucking made incredible amounts of money. And these people aren't compensated. Some people are compensated well, like Neil Gaiman was like, Neil Gaiman actually makes money whenever you buy anything Sandman related.
I have a question about that. So I don't know. I used to know more about Gaiman, but I kind of just stopped giving a shit about him. But because I don't know,
because he's a fucking writer, dude.
Yeah. Was he, did he get his beginnings with comics or novels? Was it novels, then he transitioned into comics? Because that's what I assumed. No.
No.
Oh,
So
okay.
he was writing comic books years before. Sandman is early, might have been late 80s. Sandman might have been late 80s. But yeah, so he was a comic book creator. And Sandman sold like fucking crazy. So Sandman is basically like a in my opinion, this is a hot take, but it's like kind of like a poor man's version of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. Like it's like, yeah, it's like an emo poor man's version of that. So if you like emo shit, maybe you'll like Sandman, but it's about like the god of sleep. It's still good and it's aged well. But yeah, if you buy those, he actually makes money because he was kind of a hotshot at the time. And so he made some really good contractual deals with DC. And so he actually has like a what we would call like kind of like a creator owner relationship with Sandman.
Do you think it's because of the black jacket he always used to have on in those old photos of him?
That leather jacket and that
so
long
cool.
hair. Yeah, I know. What a fucking douche, dude. He's like, and then he's like writing about like this guy who's like also wearing a leather jacket and who also like just looks like he's like from The Cure. It's like, oh my god, this is cringe. That's my take on it. Fucking cringe. But to each their own, right? I'll take Alan Moore's Swamp Thing any day. But yeah, so he makes a lot of money. But all these other creators, man, they like the people who created Superman they like died in abject poverty, like while these corporations just made this was in the 70s. Those guys were still alive. And in the 70s, there was like Superman movies, Superman serials, cartoons, everything. They didn't, they weren't making money and their name was scrubbed from the credits. Like even back then, their names were scrubbed from the credits.
This is fucked up, man. I don't like this.
Yeah. They've gone back now because it's like the court of public opinion is like, that's fucking garbage. So like if you buy anthologies now, there will be a byline with the creators. But back then it was just like, and now, even now, like major superheroes, like they don't know who the fuck wrote some of these things. They know almost all of the people who drew them because there's like, it's just easier to tell. But like, and there were major writers. Alfred Bester he wrote Superman, he wrote fucking Green Lantern, and they don't know all of the ones that he wrote. They just know some of them.
Do you think like the history of all of this, like with some presses just fucking over the cradles, do you think that has to like that it's why you've denied the presses who have reached out to you with House of Blood? Because you said up front, I believe, that 2 have reached out and you said no.
Yeah, so 2 presses reached out. One, I don't even know how the fuck they knew about it. I'm assuming that like I think some of the artists that I work with like to share with like maybe some editors and stuff like that, what they're working on. I don't know. I felt embarrassed. I didn't want to like ask, but that person was trying to pressure me. There's like giving me like a time. And so like anytime, like I feel like any kind of pressure on like a time, like when I have to deliver materials and it's like, I need this to be perfect. Not like this was in October. He wanted it done for like he wanted the issue 1 done, which was like, it was pretty much done by that time, but for like October solicits. And I was like, I don't know. It felt weird. And then the other one is like, it's actually someone that I know that I have worked with in the past that I sent for a blurb. And they, asked me about it. And, I was very flattered, but I'm just, at that point, I don't want to be someone's first book.
Yeah.
Or one of their first couple of books. And it's like, I feel like whatever you put into it, I've put in 10 times more. So why don't I just fucking do it myself?
Right, because for those listening, I mean, the reason why this episode is coming out today is because Zach just launched a Kickstarter for House of Blood. But unlike most Kickstarters, the comic book is mostly done. Volume 1 is mostly done at this point. I mean, it consists of what, like 5 issues?
Yeah, so there's volume 1 is completely done. So I guess most, like you were saying, like most Kickstarters are like issue 1, which is like 22 pages of sequential art. That's great, right? This is like over 115 or over 120 pages of sequential art. And that may change because I'm doing some stretch goals that will add a couple pages if we hit that. I think we might, because I'm getting like really good feedback. But yeah, this is over 115 pages at least of sequential art, plus covers and variant covers, and it's issues 1 through 4. Because that was the other thing, is like I feel like some people might want to like just dip their toe, or they just want the issue 1, like they don't know. So you can just buy issue 1, but it's only digital. So if you want to check out, like if you want a bundle of 3 issues, you can get that, and that'll just run you what it would cost digitally. And I will be sending those as like PDFs or CBRs or CBZs to y'all, to the people who back. But if you want to back physically, the physical rewards it's like the full volume 1 that contains all 4 issues, and it's just going to contain everything, like all supplemental art, all extras, everything.
With House of Blood, it's been many months since I've looked at what you sent me. I forget, does it have like an ongoing mascot, like a crypt keeper?
Yeah, there is.
Is it the
there's
house
this character? No, not really.
Okay.
But it's like, I mean, honest, there is a location that is recurring, but mainly there are some recurring characters, and like kind of the mascot. Well, there's 3 mascots. One's Irving, and he's like this arcane kind of venture capitalist that he'll like sell ghosts, or he'll sell your soul, or he's a real piece of shit, right? He's a capitalist piece of shit, and he's also maybe immortal. There might be something else going on with him. You'll have to read. And then there's also Marco, who is this like young, he's this teenager that's like kind of like you and me, super into comics, or horror comics and horror media in general. And then there's Bog Knight, who I already mentioned. He's kind of like this Arthurian retelling of Swamp Thing.
Bog Knight, he was a baseball player, right?
Wade Boggs. He wears a top hat and has a cane, wears all white, like a white tuxedo, right?
Let's talk about some of the fucking people you contracted to do the alt. Like, who do you have in this?
Dude, oh my God. I have so many amazing artists. Rafa Labasco, he's done 2 stories. Marco Itri, he also did 2 stories. Ryan Kasky, also known as Spooky King on Instagram, he did a story for me. I've got like, I don't know, it's like over 20 amazing creators.
Yeah.
And their art, I mean, this art is unreal. Like, I'm not gonna brag about like the writing, but like the fucking art is insanely good. And the colorists I got, like, I mean, I've got like these people that like work at Marvel and work at DC and shit. And like, is it Dean Kotz did the inks, the pencils and inks for Tree App, and Chris O'Halloran, who's done a bunch of like Marvel and DC books. I think he colored some Immortal Hulk, which is like this cool like horror version of the Hulk.
Yeah,
it's like kind of zombie Hulk thing. This book looks it doesn't look like an indie. This is an indie book. It's independently published. Like, I've fucking put my whole life into this, like literally, like a lot, like all the money that I have. I'm just can you give me money, Max?
Oh no.
How are the options doing, Max?
Not great.
Can I borrow some
You
cash?
shouldn't have bought Miguel that hat, man.
I know. But yeah, so I mean, I've like been able to work with some really, really amazing creators. And yeah, and you mentioned like how did I do that? Like how did I figure that out? So that actually took building that network was very difficult. Well, at first, but there's a couple of things that you can like if you want to get into comics. There's like a couple of hashtags that you can like search on Twitter and just start following your favorite artists and look at what they like. And if they like some, I would say look at like the Kubert school. There's sequential artists coming out of that school that are like fucking amazing artists, and they're looking for work. They're looking for collaborators. Like they want to make books. They're fucking hungry for like creatively. So I work with a lot of Kubert students. There's a lot of people that I want to work with. Like I want to do a second volume. I want to do like, I have so many ideas for stuff that I want to do. I want to do a fucking manga issue that reads right from left, and you have to like open it the other way.
Sounds
like
annoying, man.
Yeah, it's like
I've been saying that. I've been saying that wrong all my life. I thought it was manga.
Manga? Did I say manga? I don't know.
Which one is it?
Manga.
I assume you know the comic historian, as you said.
I'm no historian.
I'm introducing you like that. I mean, you can either be a comic historian or a riddle. Which one do you want?
I'll take the comic historian, bro.
Who also writes?
I'm not a writer.
So who wrote all these stories in House of Blood?
So there is one story that was co-written by Miguel Villa. And that's all I know. I don't know. Co-written, yeah.
Yeah. So is that the name he wants to go by professionally, or is it Miguel Niles now?
Yes. No, it's Villa. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I thought he changed it.
The guy, the creator, asked him. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about who's writing those stories.
So, like, how did you come upon them? Like, did they come in this like box in the mail? Did you discover them in like a grave? Because all joking aside, I think it would be cool to develop like a mythos of how you found them.
Well, that honestly, like that's a big thing of to be fully disclosed. Like there's a lot of these like kind of vanity projects on Kickstarter. I don't want to come off like that, and I don't want it to be like this one man show, right? Like these artists are like, they mean everything to me. Like they help, they are the book, right? These artists, like they're half of the book, right? And in the 50s, like I said, there's no credit, and that's what I'm paying homage to a lot. So it's just like there's not gonna, I'm crediting the artist because that's the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
But I'm not crediting the writer except for Miguel, because that's just how I want to go about
it. I like
it.
I like this. Yeah, I think it's cool.
Yeah, it's just, and I think maybe like if people come across it on Kickstarter, they're gonna see it and it's gonna look bigger than it is. Like when someone's like, hey, come, I am the writer and I'm the creator and I did all this, it's like, no, dude, you did fucking half of that, man. Like, what do you, like, get the fuck out of here. Like, but so yeah, I wanted it to seem mysterious. I wanted it to seem bigger than it is. So that's kind of why I'm like, I did an incredible amount of work, and I'm trying to just make it more about
the project,
the product, the project than about like promoting myself and promoting like I want to promote these artists. They're all awesome. Like they do amazing work. And so I'm promoting this project, and this thing is awesome. And it's like, I have other things where it's like, okay, I'll get a fucking byline. I'm plenty happy getting a byline on other stuff.
It reminds me, like in movies, the way we fetishize directors, how like, oh, that's the director, that's the guy who made the movie. But like, that's not true. I mean, have to.
Dude, they don't even fucking hold the camera half the time.
No, man,
right?
they don't even. Most of the time, they don't even decide what the shots are gonna look like. That's the fucking director of photography. The director is like, say it different. I don't know. Well, maybe they're too much of a coward and they don't say anything. And the name happens to be. Cut that. Cut it. Cut that.
I hope you beep that. Leave it and beep that.
Okay, good idea.
Yes.
Shit. Do you want to talk about any of the I can't think of the build now, what you're feeling as a rebuild for Kickstarter, or are you still not like completely fine-tuned on that?
Well, the different so like I was saying earlier, there's like you can get the issues one, you can get any amount of issues bundled, right? Or you can get the whole thing. You can get the whole thing. So then there's like this deluxe edition, right? It comes with X-ray specs. I'm actually like getting X-ray specs for this. I know you'd asked about
elaborate.
that.
What do you mean by that?
I'm getting X-ray specs.
Okay. I'm
fucking getting X-ray specs for this.
All right.
And for that for that reward, which is it's a more premium reward. I think it's like 25 or 30 or something like that. You're gonna get the book, and you're gonna get it signed, and you're gonna get some X-ray specs.
Signed by who?
So
wait a second.
I don't know. I have to think about
the
that.
House,
because I've been thinking about signing it Irving.
That'd be good.
Because he's kind of like the villain of it.
Yeah. So
I was thinking about doing it like that. So I might do that, or I might just put initials. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm gonna get some feedback on what people think, because I don't want people coming out of it and being upset by like okay, well, Irving is a fucking fake character. Yeah. They didn't sign this or whatever. Like I want, I don't want people to be upset. So we'll see.
You already got so many though.
Yeah, I know, dude. Fuck them. I got your money, dude.
Do you have are you already thinking ahead to like volume 2 at this point, or you just like?
Yeah, I actually.
Yeah. Is it done?
Yeah, dude. I actually have a script. I think I was telling you I have this script called Fish Girl.
Okay.
I fucking love it.
Send it to me.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. I got like the first issue basically like mapped out, like what the stories are, and then I have probably the first story I already written. I just haven't selected artists for it, and it's like I can't afford to create more comics without like reimbursing this insane amount of money that I spent creating this project. So I mean, I've made it I made it to where I hope it funds. I really fucking hope it funds, because it's very low especially for something that's over 100 fucking 15 pages of sequential art. Those things tend to like, I've seen a lot of those fund at like 20K. And that would be like, really, that would be a dream, because then I could immediately like, if I got 20K, I could do like variant covers, and I could go straight into a volume 2, or, an issue 5, basically issue 5 through 8.
And what are you asking anyway? Like 2,500?
Yeah, it's something tiny.
Honestly, like that. I mean, you've already the comic is done basically, right?
Yeah. So
what I mean is the Kickstarter is more like for people to pre-order the copies of a comic already done. They're not like doing a gamble on something that might not be good or anything. They have samples on the Kickstarter. You've provided a lot of the finished art already they can check out, so they know they're not like risking something that's going to end up stupid. This is a great comic, and you have the fucking evidence already made.
Yeah, actually, I'm giving away 2 free comics. I'm giving away 17 pages of sequential art as a preview. So, and that will be in the Kickstarter. So you can just you can read that, and it's, you'll get a sense of it. That's a lot of Kickstarters. Like they ask for like $2,000, and it's like you get a 20-page story. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I spent that amount like making that, but like this is what I'm passionate about. Like I have a day job, and it allows me to do things like make comic books. And so like that's why it's like I'm big in the red here. So
please go on pledge. We'll refilming this before the Kickstarter goes live. Otherwise, I won't have time to edit every time Zach says something problematic.
Super, super bad.
Yeah. So, do you have like a website to direct them to? What do you want? How do you want to tell the audience to go pledge?
So I would say like check out my Twitter and Instagram at ChappyZach. I know that's probably not great, but also just search on Kickstarter, search House of Blood, search horror anthology, horror comics. I should be up there. Hopefully it will be doing really well.
Yeah. And I'll have a link in the show notes as well. That will make it easy.
Oh,
yeah.
Awesome.
You need a House of Blood Twitter account, man. If this is going to be an ongoing series, come on.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I was thinking doing a House of Blood website too.
You should.
But it's like, man, that's more money, man. It's like
do it. Do a fucking blog spot.
Oh yeah, free. But houseofblood.com, is that taken? It's gonna be taken now that I mentioned it.
I don't know. Go to GoDaddy.com, man. Check it out. I don't know.
Who is .net?
Who is the creator of houseofblood.com?
Mystery. It's a mystery.
All right, cool. Any final thoughts you want to bring up? Anything about anything? I don't know. We've been talking a while.
Well, man, I had a lot of fun. There are some like bigger rewards. There's like physical art that I'm gonna be doing.
Yeah.
That you can get some like original art if you wanna. If you're prepared to spend some money, I can send you some fucking badass art that you can frame. And
now, do they just mail you that? Like the people who made that out, do they just mail you like the originals? I just assumed it was all digital.
Yeah, no. Well, actually, so I've had some troubles. Like I kind of explained this in chat. So one of the artists that I work with well, I'm gonna keep this vague.
Okay.
So they had some trouble. They live in a country where it's not like our country, and I actually have a comic I have a story in the fucking comic that's about this country, and how it's they have review boards, they have cultural ministries, right? And so you can't ship art easily, because art is considered like it's got to be reviewed by like a cultural ministry, right? So this artist had said that they would have sent that to me, but then now they're having trouble getting it to me, so we had to work with the other artists to get different art, and so I'm getting as much original art as I can. So I'm gonna have different rewards. Ty Peterson is providing at least 4 inks of interior arts, and then Rory Coleman has a issue 4 cover, which is fucking amazing. It's like one of the coolest fucking things I've ever seen.
Am I correct? Don't you have a stretch goal that involves you, like, whoever donates gets to die in the next volume?
Yeah, I think that's like my highest one. Yeah, I want to and basically if it funds and we get enough money and I can do another volume, I will kill you in a short story if you pay me money to do that. I will do that.
You do that to me without me having to pay that much because I did this podcast?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's okay. I'll put you. You'll die in Fish Girl. There's a lot of people that die in Fish Girl.
Send me that. I want to read that.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it's an internal document for an artist and a writer. So I mean, not a writer, co-creator or whatever.
If you ever do a podcast, like a House of Blood podcast that you run at the end of it, like how how sometimes on shows like on FX it says not a dactyl at the end. You could have another riddle.
Not a writer, not
no, I'm not saying
not related to this project in any way.
Please give me money.
I'm just promoting it. I'm just passionate about comic books. Obviously, you heard me talk about history of comics, so that's it.
Yeah, you like comic historian. Well, thank you for coming on. I am not going to give any more updates about my my brother in Biden because it got really racist and problematic quite quickly.
I think your brother's on that crack pipe.
I think he is.
I think he's on that Biden.
He began ranting about black people like pretty quickly. And then it ended with him telling me I'm no fun because I won't talk about the news with him, which he says is his hobby.
Dude, your brother fucking sucks.
He's a terrible human being. I'm gonna block him again because he's just a waste of time, like a waste of headspace. So he's pretty much like dead headspace, I would say, which is something no one should listen to. Now, that's it. That's the episode. All right, that was Zach Chapman talking about the history of Hulu Comics, Ghost of Quilt, House of Blood, now on Kickstarter for like 20 or so days still. Go get the trade paperback of Volume 1. I did. I'm going to get it. Can't wait to get it. And meanwhile, go buy a book from my own press, GhoulishBooks.com. Go buy some books. Pre-order a signed copy of my new novel, Maggot Screaming, at GhoulishBooks.com. Leave a review of the podcast on iTunes. This is not me asking you. This is a demand. I want no fucking reviews of the show. Do it. I crave attention. I need compliments to live.
Live spooky, die spooky.
Rest in peace, Max.